Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to NorthStar Genetics Spring Series, Session 2. Today we have the honor of having Harrie Davies from NorthStar Genetics. Kind of follow up from last week when Jason Hansen from Rock and Roll Agronomy talked through some of the issues that we may be facing in the challenging spring ahead. And Harrie's going to follow up from that event and talk about, what's your plan B, and share how soybeans may fit into your crop plan and be a potential backup plan in the spring. So once again, we welcome everyone and thank you for joining. We would have loved to have done this in person down at our Morris meeting. But with the times, we're going to do our best to do it virtually and hopefully, give this out to a wider audience and hit a broader focus so that more people can join than the ones that maybe could have only joined us in Morris. So bear with me if we have some technical difficulties. We will try to get them fixed. But hopefully you can see our screen and the video coming through. So I do want to have a couple of reminders here. If you have any questions, throughout the conversation that we have today, there's a couple of different ways that you can get those questions to us. And one of them is to text them in to the number on your screen, so 204-403-8444, and we will get your question. And another way is to use the chat function, which is highlighted on your screen. You can type in a question there, and we will get them up on the screen and be able to answer Harrie as he's talking through. Just a quick reminder, we have placed most of the few of the phone lines on mute just so we can eliminate any background noise. And so if you do want to ask a question in person, you can. Just a reminder that you may want to unmute your computer line, or if you're talking on the phone, you might have to push *6 in order to unmute your line to talk, just so we can try to eliminate any background noises. The preferred method is still to text in to 204-403-8444, and we will make sure that we ask Harrie your question. So just another reminder is we will be recording this webinar so that we can share it with a broader audience for people who may have not be able to attend this morning. We know it's cold in a lot of areas, but there is still action going out on the farms, so we will be recording it so that we can post on our website and share it with others who maybe couldn't join, or maybe some who had some technical difficulties along the way. And with that, we will maybe get on with it for the next hour. So I'll maybe introduce Harrie Davies. He's our production manager for NorthStar Genetics, based out of Winnipeg, Manitoba, and works with probably a fair number of you on the phone know Harrie. He's been with NorthStar for a number of different years, and he's going to walk through how soybeans can help you out this spring. So I'll maybe pass it over to Harrie.
Good morning, everyone. Quite excited to be here this morning, being able to present to you folks how soybeans can be an excellent plan A if you've already got them in your rotation, or an alternate plan B should things happen this spring that are unfortunate and delay seeding. So I think the first point I want to make is getting the seed into the ground timely and properly is probably the number one priority for growers this spring, like any other spring. Last week in our first spring series, we discussed all the potential hurdles that growers are facing this spring, whether it be, I've got ruts in my field. I haven't worked my field. I've still got crop potentially out of my field. I don't have any fertility down. So far this spring, it's also been very cold. A lot of soils are wet. So we recognize that this spring there's going to be a lot of hurdles potentially thrown at our growers as we work through spring. And today's presentation is basically how soybeans can help you through a tough spring in the event that, for reasons whether it be environmental, whether it be logistical, etc., how soybeans can help you this spring should not everything go according to plan. We do recognize that most of our growers probably already have a plan A intact, but in the event, like I said earlier, some of the things go sideways on us, then we think soybeans are an exceptional possibility and option for you as growers. So what we're going to discuss today briefly from an agenda standpoint is we're going to touch on fertility, how soybeans can help you with fertility. We're going to discuss seeding dates versus average yields, how soybeans planted later in the season can yield better than other crops. We'll discuss the insurable dates that are available for soybeans. Then we'll discuss, okay, now we're telling you that you can plant beans later in the spring. Now, how far can I go into the fall with varieties to expect? When is my average first killer frost? To provide some comfort level for the varieties that would be acceptable to grow on your farm. And that leads into actually, what varieties can I plant when? And that's all based on your farm location, your timing of planting, your level of risk as a grower, etc. So when we look at fertility, soybeans, we all recognize that we do not need to apply nitrogen. So potentially that could mean one less delivery, potentially one less worry, maybe even one less pass, depending on your operation. We're not sure on logistics. There's lots of concerns with spring logistics. There's a lot of fertility that needs to get put down this spring. By growing soybeans, that takes the nitrogen spring logistics out of the equation. So it's one less thing you need to worry about. If you're not applying nitrogen, it also can save you time at planting because you'll be able to do it quicker. But we do need to remember that even though soybeans don't need nitrogen, we still need to be applying phosphate and potassium at the bare minimum for crop removal. So that still may mean you still have to do fertility this spring because you didn't get it on last fall. You'll still need to have to incorporate that into your plan. But from an overall fertility standpoint, by not having to apply nitrogen, that can save you time and take one less potential worry off your plate. I talked earlier on seeding dates versus average yield response. So in front of you is some data from MASC for the 1989 to 2008 year period. And what this graph represents is, if you look on the left-hand side, we have our relative yields of our crops, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120%. And then on the bottom, we have 1-5, first week of May, second week of May, third week of May, fourth week of May, into the first week of June. So you can see the various crops. It's a bit of a busy slide, but you'll notice the green perforated line at the top, which is soybeans. So you can see planting soybeans starting second week of May. We don't recommend planting them earlier than that, just due to spring frost, all the way to the end of the first week of June. When you look at how soybeans compare for average yield versus other crops, soybeans are higher yielding planted later. You do not lose as much yield as in some other crops. For example, if you looked at wheat, cereals, you looked at canola, the later you go into the planting season, the more dramatic your yield response is has dropped off. So this is based on 25 years or 20 years of data from Manitoba Ag Services Corporation, so crop insurance, showing that soybeans, if planted late, you do not lose the same amount of yield potential versus some other crops. So I'll let you just have a look at that so you can see the other crops for a second. So when we look at planting dates when it comes to Manitoba crop insurance and Saskatchewan crop insurance, soybeans have a very favorable planting insurance-wise deadlines. So if you look at risk level 1, risk level 2, risk level 3, risk level 4, in Manitoba we have 4 risk areas. Risk area 1 being the South Red River Valley, kind of south of Morris, down in that Morden, Winkler, Altona countryside, areas that we get an incredible amount of heat units compared to some other parts of the province. That would be the area where we can grow soybeans the longest. So risk area 1, you can plant soybeans with full coverage till the 6th of June. Risk areas 2, 3, and 4, you have full coverage with crop insurance in Manitoba with planting up till May 30th. When we look at the extended seeding periods for these risk zones, you can plant soybeans up to June 11th with 80% coverage in risk area 1. Risk area 2, 80% coverage extended seeding period is to June 4th, as well with area 3. And if you're a grower in area 4, you do not have any extended seeding period, so you need to get your beans in by May the 30th. Just threw up the dates in a different format so you can have a look. But if we need to plant later into the spring, from a crop insurance standpoint, we've got some really good coverage options available in Manitoba. In Saskatchewan, brand new this year, soybeans are now insurable in all of Saskatchewan. Growers have individualized insured history, not regional averages will be used. So your past history will determine your level of coverage. And for the whole province, they have just one date, and that date is June 5th for the deadline for insurance. So it's something new for Saskatchewan. I know in the past it's been a bit of a hurdle not being able to get any form of insurance for planting soybeans. So this is great news.
Hey, Harrie, we do have one question for you, and it goes back to previous slide you had regarding the soybean yield when they're planted later in the season. And a farmer asked, is the reason for soybeans not losing as much yield potential relative to other crops, does that have to do with their response to photoperiod mainly, or are there other reasons why soybeans can get a better yield later on than other crops?
Thanks, Tyler. In my opinion, we've always said since we've been growing soybeans in Manitoba that soybeans like warm weather, warm soil, warm conditions. So I've seen in the past where we've planted soybeans earlier into cold ground, and they've taken a long time to get out of the ground, and their vigor has not been nearly as strong as other years when we're planting towards the 20th, 25th, 30th of May and planting soybeans into warm ground. So getting the beans off to a really good start is critical to maximize your yield potential. Having beans sit in the ground early for a few weeks, the weather goes sour maybe after you plant, which you don't have control over as a grower. In my opinion, I think planting beans late because it is it loves everything about warmth. Warm nights, warm days, likes lots of moisture. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but soybeans for the most part, planting them a little bit later into ideal conditions, they will catch up in the season versus planting them too early into less than ideal conditions. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, you said sounds good. So thank you, Harrie.
So we discussed so far to date fertility, and then we shared how planting soybeans later, you tend to not lose as much yield potential versus other crops. And then we also discussed the potential crop insurance for Manitoba and Saskatchewan, available dates for planting. So that's on the front half of the season. So I'm sure you're all wondering, okay, well, Harrie, NorthStar Genetics, you're saying you can plant beans late into May, maybe even early into June. But what about the back end of the season? What about when we're worried about, a fall frost? So in front of you is some data from the Manitoba Agriculture Weather Program based on 60 years of data. And you can see the average first fall date using -2 degrees Celsius. So if I looked at the map and I was down in that Morden-Winkler area, our first fall frost of -2 degrees is somewhere in that October 3rd to October 5th. If I was to go further west towards Brandon, my first fall frost is somewhere in that September 27th, 28th range. If I looked at Portage-la Prairie, I'm around the 1st of October on an average. Considering that these are just averages based on 60 years. And if I was up in Swan River countryside and I was wanting to grow soybeans and it was getting late in planting season, my average first fall frost date is around the 19th of September. Another way of looking at it, off a different website, but mirror images the previous map, are the average first fall frost dates for Dauphin, Emerson, Winnipeg, Portage, Saskatoon, Yorkton. You will notice that there is a frost, a date with at 0 degrees Celsius, and as well a minus 2 degrees Celsius date. For the province of Saskatchewan, first fall date averages, you can see to the south is in that September 11th to September 17th date. When you get Highway 16 corridor north, which kind of represents above the blue line, we've got areas that are from September 11th to 17th, and then we also have areas that are in that September 5th to 10th as well. So as we go further north into Saskatchewan, we don't have the same length of season that we would have in further east into Manitoba.
Harrie, just got one text question here. So you're using 0 and -2. Why are you using -2 versus a 0?
Very good question, Tyler. So when we're looking at a frost for soybeans, there is enough data that represents that what is a killer frost for soybeans. If we have a tinge of a frost at 0 degrees or just below 0 for a short period, you will see that some of the leaves will have browned off, curled up, but not necessarily will it kill that soybean plant. Those seeds would still be viable, would still be allowed to mature. Once we hit -2 degrees Celsius, we have -2 degrees Celsius for an hour or two, that would be considered a killer frost for soybeans. At that time, that plant will die. The seeds in those pods will remain at that same maturity where they are presently. So at -2 degrees Celsius, if you've got green seed in some of your pods, you will remain and have green immature seed. So we use -2 degrees Celsius as a potential date because that's really when that crop physically will die, and that's the maturity range that we're looking at. So it's a bit of semantics, correct, but a killer frost for soybeans is usually around -2 degrees Celsius for a few hours.
Perfect. Thank you.
So the next slide I want to show you is a slide based on soybean maturity days. So how I would interpret this slide is, let's say I plant on the 25th of May, and my average fall frost of -2 degrees is September the 20th. That would tell me that I have approximately 119 days, growing days, to grow my soybean crop based on an average year. So you can look at all the different planting dates And sometimes in some years, we're planting beans on May the 15th, even earlier. But what we're trying to represent here is if we know when we're going to plant and we know when our average frost is, then we can calculate the total amount of growing days available for that crop. And if we can do that, then we at NorthStar Genetics can make recommendations based on the amount of days, where your farm location is, what your level of risk as a grower is, etc. So, if I'm a grower in the South Red River Valley, Morris, Altona, Winkler, I've listed a bunch of our varieties here. They're rated from the earliest maturing to the latest. And I've got a May 25th date. So how I would interpret this slide, if it's May 25th or earlier, whether I want to plant Watson, a very early maturing variety, or if I want to plant a later full season product like Winkler, if I'm in the South Red River Valley, every variety is available to me to plant on the 25th of May. I have no limitations. We would not recommend any varieties that would not be suitable based on the date and based on where your farm is located. Green means go. So if you see a variety with green, that means we would recommend those varieties can be planted on your farm. We get delayed a little further, and now it's May the 30th, South Red River Valley. Once again, we say you can still plant all of these varieties. They're all still well within the range for maturity. We did say it was early October before we get our first killer frost on average. You'll notice Winkler is in yellow now. Yellow means caution. Yes, we still recommend that you can plant Winkler, but keep in mind that it is a full season product. And maybe if it is May 30th and I was going to plant a section of Winkler seed, maybe now I'm only planting a half section. Conversely, now it's June the 4th. We've been delayed. We've had a few rains, etc. Now my list is starting to shorten because now I'm getting later into the spring season. So when I'm on June 4th, I'm not going to plant Winkler. I'm not going to recommend that you plant Richer. I'm going to say you could still plant Sperling, but what's your level of risk and tolerance? Don't plant all your acres to that. And the following four varieties are acceptable. And then if we got right till almost the 8th of June for the Red River Valley, and now it's okay, should I be planting beans? We're going to recommend Watson or Redvers only. And Watson would be 100%. We are confident that you have enough season. Redvers, you can plant some Redvers, but do it with caution. We looked closer to Winnipeg. A lot of the same situation on May 25th. We're still confident that you can plant all varieties within our lineup. Like I said earlier, if you're planting way earlier into May, of course, you can plant everything. We get to May 30th, where we said south of Winnipeg, down the South Red River Valley, we said you could still plant Winkler with caution. We're saying no. Now we're getting too late. Could I still plant Richer? Yeah. But I wouldn't plant all my acres to that. June 4th, I'm cutting my list down even further. Around Winnipeg, I've got Watson, Redvers, Gladstones, maybe Coloros. And then on June 8th, similar to the south part of the province, we're still saying Watson's and Redvers would still be acceptable. To be cautious, Redvers is a little bit longer season than Watson. I'm looking up into the Interlake now north of Winnipeg. You can see my list is a little shorter for available options. If it's May 25th, I'm not recommending Winklers or Richards. May 30th, you could still plant Sperlings, but there is a little bit of risk, caution. I wouldn't plant all my acres. June 4th, I'm thinking Watson's, Redvers, and I would still consider planting Gladstone. June 8th, you should only be planting Watson's, in our opinion. If I look at southwest Manitoba, southeast Saskatchewan, you'll see some different varieties here, more in our earlier genetic maturing products. May 25th or earlier, I'm comfortable planting Wynyard, Leroy, Watson, Redvers, Gladstone, Newton. Colross, I would consider planting it, but I'd have a little bit of caution because if you're familiar with a product like Gladstone, it's probably just a little bit later than that. So I wouldn't plant too many acres in it, but I would still consider Colross as an option. I'll go a little later to May 30th. Still comfortable planting Wynyard, Leroy, Watson, Redvers. And now I'm saying May 30th, Gladstone and Newton. Yeah, I can still plant it, but I wouldn't plant all my acres to that. June 4th, the list shortens. Wynyards and Leroys as the two earliest varieties that we have, and I potentially might plant some Watson. And then if I got even 3-4 days later, I would cautiously consider planting Wynyard, Leroy, or Watson, but knowing that you are pushing the envelope probably for maturity. And if I look at in Saskatchewan, Highway 16 North, so the Highway 16 corridor where a lot of the darker soil zones where soybeans are a good fit, options available on the 25th of May would be Wynyard, Leroy, and Watson. It gets a little bit later, May the 30th. We'd say Wynyard, Leroy, and Watson as well. And be with the Watsons, just be cognizant that it is a few days later than the two earlier products, Leroy and Wynyard. That maybe I wouldn't put all my acres into Watson. Because of the cooler nights and less heat units, we're not recommending planting beans June 4th or 8th into Saskatchewan on the Highway 16 North at this time. So you may ask for all the different areas how we come by this information. We do our demo sites. Claude Durand does our demo sites and evaluates all our products for maturity. So we've built up a data package for, let's say, Gladstone, for example. We've got 3-4 years of data on how many days from when we planted to when that plant was mature. So we have a good average and a good comfort level when we make these recommendations to you folks based on our demo sites in various locations throughout Manitoba and Saskatchewan.
I got two questions here, Harrie. So maybe I'll ask via text. I'll maybe ask the first one, and I have to paraphrase this a little bit. But how well, how do I paraphrase this? How well positioned would a retailer be if I wanted to switch out varieties because it's getting late? Hopefully I didn't take too much out of that.
Depending on the retail and each individual retail, I would suggest that most retailers at this time probably have soybeans sitting in their bins of NorthStar Genetics that may or may not all be sold. So in some cases, retailer of choice for that grower would simply just have that conversation, and you wanted to plant Winkler, but now you're going to plant Colross because it's 3-4 days earlier and you're concerned on maturity. Those varieties have a good chance of already being potentially at that retailer, or if not, NorthStar Genetics, we have seed available that is processed and ready to go. We would need a little bit of lead time, but not a lot. It would be simply a matter of, okay, Mr. Retailer A, you need 500 units of Colross. You don't have it here. Let us arrange for shipment and delivery. So probably next day delivery service. But it has to be processed and clean and ready to go. And as the spring season continues to go, ourselves at NorthStar Genetics are looking at what's the potential for walk-up. Do we have the right amounts of available seed with the right maturities in the event that some of these situations occur? So I think we're well placed to handle it. But it may mean in some cases a grower switching from a later variety to an earlier one. We may not have the exact variety, but we may have a different one that's really close to it for maturity. So I think we're well positioned. It's just going to mean a lot of really, really good communication with our growers to our retailers and with our retailers to ourselves. Did that answer, Tyler?
I think so. I think you probably, I don't even know if I have to answer the second one because I think you were probably answering it within there. He was just, is there a lead time window and that they have to give us a heads up? So I think you answered it in your first question. Okay, that's all from here right now.
So just wanted to summarize today's discussion. And from NorthStar Genetics, we're extremely confident that in the event that things don't go as planned this spring for you, our growers, for whatever reasons that we discussed last week and the environment going into it this spring, if planning gets delayed, we want you to feel very confident that soybeans are an excellent option, whether it be your plan A or an excellent option for your plan B, now that it is the end of May and I need to get a crop in the ground that I'm comfortable with. We showed and explained to you how soybeans, as we go later into the spring, have a less yield penalty versus other crops. I know in my past I've seen some of the best soybean crops I've ever seen for yield were planted May 28th, May 30th, and they did fabulously well. So the confidence in planting late is extremely high on my behalf, and I know with the rest of my colleagues at NorthStar Genetics. Based on your planning date, where your farm is located, your average frost data, your level of risk as a grower, there is a variety from NorthStar Genetics available for every acre on your farm. So whether you're up in Melfort, Saskatchewan, or whether you're down in Altona, Manitoba, depending on the date and your level of risk, you have options available this spring going forward that you can use on your farm to still have a very profitable soybean crop. So we're really, like I said, we don't want anybody to have a tough spring, and we really want you growers and retailers to have everything go according to plan. But in the event that things go a little bit sideways, I'll stress again that soybeans are an excellent option available for you as growers. Does anybody else have any other questions for me?
And once again, if you do, I've asked a couple through the text and one through the chat. If you can use either of the features to chat them in by typing it on your screen, and we'll get it as a pop-up, or by texting your question to 204-403-8444. And we'll give it a minute or so in case there's some last-minute questions that are coming in. Okay. Well, I'll maybe continue. Oh, one here. So a question came in via the chat here, Harrie. I've been watching soil temp and the weekly forecast. Is 10 degrees Celsius the bare minimum, or should I wait for the soil to be closer to 15 degrees Celsius? So I repeat again. So watching the soil temperature, weekly forecast, do you still recommend 10 degrees being the bare minimum before you plant soybeans, or would you wait till it's closer to 15?
The higher the soil temperature, the better it is for your beans. But if my ground is 10 degrees Celsius warm, my soil, we'll say at an inch and a half deep, where I'm going to be planting my soybeans, and the land is working really well, and it's 10 degrees. And when I say 10 degrees, I mean 10 degrees over a 24-hour period, not 10 degrees at 2:30 in the afternoon in the heat of the day. So if I've got really warm soil and the forecast is favorable, and I do not anticipate the soil temperatures dropping, if I'm at 10 degrees Celsius, I'm planting. If I'm at 10 degrees and it's looking like a cold snap's coming in, I may do some planting. I wouldn't go hog wild per se. Now, if I had the time and I could wait till it was 15 degrees, will I get better vigor and better up and out of the ground with my start to my soybean crop? You bet. But usually most springs, we can't afford the time we need to plant, because you never know when that next rain, et cetera, is going to come along. So I think if you hit 10 degrees and on a warming cycle, I'm planting.
Nice. Thank you. I don't see any more at this time, Harrie, but if there are more questions that pop in, by all means, you know where to reach us, or you can, contact any of your NorthStar Genetic reps or your retailers, and I'm sure we will get your questions answered as best we can. So, thank you once again, Harrie, for going through why soybeans create a great option, and that Plan B. If you don't, if the fertilizer isn't working out, if you haven't been able to get over the soil like you want to get it as prepped, and you're just rushing, it is a good relief that soybeans can be planted later in the year and you still get good yield responses out of them. So thank you once again. For next week, same time, same place, 9 o'clock Central Standard or Daylight Time. So 9 in Manitoba, 8 in Saskatchewan and Alberta. And we're going to have Dieter Schwartz, our corn product line manager, out of Eastern Manitoba join us from NorthStar Genetics. Talk a whole bunch on corn agronomy, but probably focusing more on how that even emergence is just so critical when it comes to corn and some of the tips and tricks in doing that. So we look forward next week to having Dieter share some of his comments around corn and corn emergence. So with that, I maybe once again would like to just thank Harrie, but also would like to thank everyone for their business and for your support. And hopefully, even today, hopefully this puts some peace of mind in the back of your mind that if it gets late in the year, NorthStar would be able to cover your needs from a soybean perspective. I did get, maybe this is a refresher, Harrie, but are there any varieties of beans? It's a refresher that are sold out that you may not be able to supply here over the course of the spring. I know we sent out that note, but did you want to touch on sold out situations for soybeans? Any products?
Sure, Tyler. Presently today, the only variety that we are sold out of is our NSC Winkler, which is our full season Roundup Ready to Extend variety. All varieties other than Winkler, we still have supply of, some more than others, but at this time, we feel we're quite comfortably sitting with respect to any new spring business that should come our way.
Cool. Awesome. No, thank you. And once again, thank you everyone for joining, and we'll chat to you next week. Bye for now.